Here I am, as usual, surrounded in French people and Englishmen. It's never really that comfortable, to be honest. But I've been a part of Tablas since its inception. My hand has been on every vintage. First grapes harvested were 94, I believe, so pretty early in the game. And it's been a very curious and interesting project. And just briefly, so those of you who don't know, it's a partnership between the Haas family, the great Robert Haas, importer, and the Rhône family of Chateau de Bouxtel and Chateau de Pape. So the interesting thing that is pertinent to this wine particularly, I think, is we made the crazy move of importing cuttings of grapevines through quarantine into California. So bringing in grape varieties that are barely even planted there anymore into California where they had never been planted. So really, when you plant a grapevine, a variety that has never been grown in that area, and sure many of these guys have done that, you don't know what you're going to get because it didn't show that well in Châteauneuf. Does not mean that it won't show well in Paso. And I will say that some of the varieties show better in Paso to me than they do in Châteauneuf, which I'm sure some people will disagree. But again, the uniqueness of Paso, I think, more than anything, is the limestone, as Chloe mentioned, but that nighttime coolness, that Pacific Ocean breeze that comes in every day. Without that, we're not there making wine, in my opinion. That is critical to what we do. So to get to this wine in particular, so it's an odd story. So we're 120 acres. In 2019, we're probably harvesting off about 90 all Rhône varieties. From there, we're making, at that point, 3 different red Rhône blends. And then Robert Haas decided that we should make another Rhône blend that was based around Terre Noire, which we had just harvested for the first time in 2013, I think. And 16 was the first version of this wine. So Terre Noire, I'm sure all of you are incredibly conversant with that grape variety. It's nobody knows what it is. I think last time I looked, there was 300 acres planted throughout the world. So when we harvested it, we were expecting it to be something it wasn't. I thought it was going to be darker. The skins looked not super pale. After fermentation, it was basically, all intents and purposes, a very, very beautifully structured rosé. So curious. And then so Bob decided we should create a wine around this variety. So you'll feel the difference in these 3 wines, clearly. I mean, the first 2 were very opulent and beautiful. This is more austerity, more savory. So, you know, being tasked with that job, I'm already making 3 Rhône red blends from the same property. Now we have to make a 4th one, and it has to stand alone. And Terre Noire is beautiful, it's great, but it doesn't seem to be powerful until you start blending with it. So we decided, we're going to do Syrah and Terre Noire, and we're going to do something a little different with Syrah that I know my neighbors had been playing with, and I was enjoying watching. We did a lot of whole clusters. So in this particular wine, I think it's about 20% whole cluster with primarily the Grenache, and then about 8% of putting stem inclusion back into Syrahs. And it's 3 different clones of Syrah, all on a west-facing slope. The Grenache is from a north-facing, a south-facing, and a west-facing, so 3 different blocks. Terre Noire is on probably the worst possible piece of our property to try and propagate a new variety. It's fully west-facing with 0 topsoil. It's white limestone rocks on that face, so tough ground, but producing a beautiful wine. So as with everything Tablas, it was mentioned, the ROC thing, which we're incredibly proud of, obviously, but we're certified organic in 03, certified biodynamic in 11, and then the first in the world for ROC in whenever that was, 20, I think, or 22. So farming is very important to us, clearly. But the goal of that farming is to bring grapes to the winery that are reflections of an incredible piece of land that the Perrin and Haas families chose to purchase. Not unlike Chloe's father, they could have gone anywhere. They could have gone anywhere in the world to try this project. But they chose Paso because of the limestone, because of the rainfall in the west, and because of the proximity to that Pacific Ocean. Eric Jens wasn't there yet, so it was still quite quiet. But the point being, you can make wines of great diversity and great freshness from this property. So into the winery, everything hand-picked. Everything's native yeast, everything's native malolactic. This particular wine, all neutral, but I think it all starts as individual lots, very small lots, goes to neutral barrels. It was blended in blended in April, sorry. And then into a foudre, into concrete, and into some large format neutral French oak pungens, 132-gallon barrels. Aged about 10 months as a blend, and then to bottle. We would love to do more co-ferment. I think that was an interesting thing, and I think it may be the one thing that global warming might help us with a little bit. We may be able to do more co-ferments because things are getting ripening a little more together, if you will. So I'd like to play with that more in the future. But for this wine, there was many small lots that were brought together, and it's, I think, 67 Syrah, 27 Grenache, and there's only 6 Terre Noir in this wine. But you can feel it, you can see it in the color. Terre Noir has a great influence, and I love it as a single variety, but we only have about 2/3 of an acre planted, so the majority ends up in this wine, which Bob chose to call a Complice for the Terre Noir.
Thank you, Neil. You know, I think back to when I visited you last and we were first talking about regenerative farming, and the way he explained it to me is that regenerative is basically taking biodynamics and applying science to it. You know, like taking those principles and actually putting science to it and engineering it in a way that is like a self-healing to the land. But my big question is, when speaking about global warming, does regenerative hurt or help? Have there been more challenges than benefits?
I mean, to be honest, the leap in actual farming for us from being organic and biodynamic was not that big to go to regenerative. I mean, the big stumbling block for us with the ROC thing is tillage, which is a whole other subject we don't need to get into here. But there are small things that we had to change. Probably in all honesty, the biggest leap for us when we did the ROC thing, and we were the pilot vineyard, that's why we got to be quick on the board there, is the human element and how you treat the people on your property. That was not that we were slave drivers or miserable human beings, but there were things that we hadn't really paid attention to, and that really brought it to our attention. I think that was the biggest single thing we made. I think, you know, we came from a history of Chateau de Beaucastel farming organically, I think, since the 50s and 60s, and we continued in that vein, and then going to the biodynamics. I think we were farming in a very good way. I don't think the ROC regenerative stuff changed that much in that world. It was more of, you know, it's 3 pillars, so it's the farm, the animals, and the people. And again, we weren't doing anything badly to our people, but there were some things that we learned, which was super cool, and we changed in a big way what we do with our employees, the field workers particularly, and I think that was the hugest impact for me of ROC. Right. Yes, we changed some things in the farming, and it keeps us accountable to what we believe and the blah, blah, blah that I say, stand up here and speak, but we live it and we do it, and those certifications, as much as we hate the paperwork, they keep us honest to that. And if you see that on the bottle, it's meaningful. Because particularly the ROC now, I think, because it's not just farming. I think most of us want to farm well and look after our land. I mean, these days, farming with chemicals is probably getting rarer and rarer, I would hope, within our industry. The grape industry gets to do things that other farming industries does not, and I see it as our job to stand up there and prove that it can be done, and be done well, and be done with a profit, which, you know, when people start farming lettuce and broccoli regeneratively, that's when we change the world. I don't think Tablas Creek actually growing that way is going to change the world, but the influence throughout the farming community as a whole, that's where we change the world and how people farm, and that's how we can address climate change more than anything. You know?
Yeah. So it's a very noble cause, absolutely. What do we think about this wine? That's cool. It is pretty cool, isn't it? Right? This is a Rhône blend from California.
Terre Noir is pretty exceptional. It's a really interesting wine. One of the other ones, probably the most interesting, we have Muscadin, which I hope I said that correctly, but Muscadin nobody cares about that grape. It was in quarantine at UC Davis for 13 years before we got it out. You know, and still nobody cares, but we do. We care. And one day I will make a wine with all 13 in Paso Robles, California. That will happen soon, very soon.
Beautiful. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I just have a quick one. What's happening with the nursery?
Oh God, the nursery. You know, I was not. This isn't my business, right? So I'm not bragging, but the nursery was a huge thing for California in general. I mean, for America in general, because grape varieties and clonal selections were brought in legally and clean. I mean, they didn't stay clean for very long because they were planted out in the vineyards, but they did that. They made that decision. That's a 3-year quarantine process before you, and you get 10 grapevines if you're lucky, and propagate from that. So really, most people that are growing Rhônes either have or have contemplated using some of that Tablas material. And at that point, which was 1991, that was very unusual for clones to come in. You couldn't get them through the nurseries, so that was unique. However, the nursery business is a grueling, grueling business, and we subsequently passed that off to a nursery. So our selections are still available, but through a nursery that does what they do, and we get to do what we do, which is grow grapes and make wine. But I think it was a great success for certainly the Rhône movement within the United States of America, without a doubt. And again, I didn't do that. I just helped.
Yes.
Please. Yes, just a question regarding blending with terroir. Was there for you a light bulb aha moment as to how it could play with the other varietals, or was it something where you got to taste it alone first?
Was there a light bulb moment with blending with Terra Noir? I don't know that would be the case. I mean, it was, I guess for me, the light bulb moment would be we're going to put it with Syrah, and Syrah is just going to kill it, and it did not at all. It really, even though it's pale, the structure that it has is incredible. And so it really stood up. It's kind of like I see with Viognier and whites, just small amounts show, though I guess that's a bit more predictable with Viognier. With Terre Noire, I really didn't think 6% would show in this wine, but I know the grape and I know the wine, and you can perceive it in this. You can perceive a bit of the color in there too. So I guess the light bulb moment was that. It's got more to it than we thought it did, and it can stand up to the bigger varieties quite easily. And it's a pretty special grape variety, and I'd like to plant more. I love the single variety, but it's really curious, and you know, it's not going to be a smash hit in the national market. But
It's kind of an anomaly for somebody who's tasting it for the, relatively for the first time, where you think of those blending components where a little goes a long way.
Yeah.
And you think of Petit Verdot, Malbec, you think of very Cabernet Franc, you think of very, very potent.
yeah, it's got its place. And again, you know, we asked our French partners, you know, what should we expect from Terre Noire, and they just kind of went, because they just field blend it. So they didn't really have a strong sense. And it's still early days. When you got 2/3 of an acre on one specific slope, I mean, future I'll have some on a much cooler site, I think, so it doesn't get so blasted. But I think it's always going to be a niche grape, but it's a super cool grape for California for sure. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I feel like this is a seminar unto itself, to be honest. I mean, I think, again, the saving grace for us is, for the time being, the Pacific Ocean is there. And I see, and my pastoral friends can disagree with me, Eric, Chloe, but I actually see less that it's getting a lot hotter and more that it's not getting as cold, if you will. I mean, I used to do frost protection before I got smart and have someone else do it for me. And I would get up a minimum a dozen times a year. My kid is now taking over that job, and he didn't get up once last year, but that is a change. I mean, we're not getting dramatically hotter, in my opinion, and that's based on no data that I'm looking at, just from living on that property. Yeah, it's getting a bit warmer, but the bigger thing for me is it's not getting as cold, which also changes things. But I mean, the frost is what we're not seeing as much, which is an indicator to me. And of course, rain is just out of control, bizarre. I mean, we went from whatever it was, 4 or 5 years of no rain to almost 60 inches, which was great for vineyards and plants, not so much for people, but we embraced it. And then it rained well this year too, but what does next year bring? We just don't know. I mean, I think if I'm honest, it's a lot less frightening to us than it is to Chateauneuf, for example. You know, that's where I'd be worried, and you know, Burgundy can always grow Syrah, right? So they shouldn't be too worried.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you.